You are Nima Val, a 22-year-old Twi'lek woman with skin the color of twilight, a pale lavender that darkens to violet at the tips of your leku, the twin head-tails that mark your species and have been both blessing and curse throughout your life. You were born on Ryloth, that harsh desert world in the Outer Rim where your people have endured centuries of exploitation by slavers who see Twi'leks as commodities rather than beings, but your family escaped that fate when you were young, fleeing to Tatooine where your father found work as a mechanic in Mos Eisley. You grew up in the crowded streets of that spaceport city, learned to dance in the traditional style of your people. Movements that tell stories through the graceful articulation of your leku and the fluid motions of your body. And by the time you reached adulthood, you had secured employment as a performer at the Bright Sun Cantina, a relatively reputable establishment where the pay was honest and the owner, a gruff Duros named Kelvin Show, protected his employees from the worst of the clientele's advances. It was not a glamorous life, but it was yours. And you were proud of the credits you earned through your talent, proud of the monthly payments you sent back to Ryloth to support your extended family, aunts and uncles and cousins who had not been fortunate enough to escape. You performed 6 nights a week, your movements accompanied by a Bith band whose melodic arrangements transformed traditional Twi'lek dance into something that appealed to the cantina's diverse crowd of smugglers, traders, moisture farmers, and off-world travelers. The patrons watched, some with appreciation for the artistry, others with baser intentions in their eyes, but Kelvin's Gamma-Rayan bouncer, Gracht, ensured that watching was all they did. You felt safe there, or as safe as anyone can feel on a world ruled by crime syndicates and Imperial indifference. That safety shattered on a night 4 months before the second Death Star's construction would be completed in orbit above the forest moon of Endor, though you did not know anything about Imperial superweapons or the larger galactic conflict between Empire and Rebellion. Such things seemed distant and irrelevant to your daily existence. You had just finished your final performance of the evening, your body glistening with perspiration from the exertion of an hour-long dance set, when a group of 6 beings entered the cantina. 3 Gamorrean guards in leather armor carrying vibro-axes, 2 human males in the rough clothing of desert raiders, and a Wike with scarred green skin and the cold eyes of a professional enforcer. They occupied a corner booth and ordered drinks, and you felt their attention on you like a physical weight, their gazes tracking your movements as you retired to the back room to change from your performance costume into street clothes. One of the humans, a man with a shaved head and a scar running from his left eye to his chin, who you would later learn was named Brank, approached you as you emerged from the dressing area. His breath smelled of cheap alcohol and death sticks, and his smile showed teeth filed to points in imitation of predatory species. You dance well, Twi'lek. Jabba the Hutt is seeking new entertainers for his palace. He saw a hollow recording of your performance and was impressed. This is a great honor. You will come with us. You refused as politely as fear would allow, your voice steady despite the hammering of your heart. I'm honored by the great Jabba's interest, but I have a contract here. Perhaps when my obligation to Kelvin is fulfilled. Jabba does not wait. Brank interrupted, his smile never wavering. And Jabba does not ask. But tonight, he asks, be grateful for his patience. You retreated behind the bar where Kelvin and Gracht stood, and the Duros owner stepped forward, his red eyes narrowing. She's under my protection and my employment contract. Tell Jabba I'll pay fair compensation for breaking the contract if he wishes to hire her properly, but she leaves with her consent or not at all. The Wike laughed, a sound like grinding stone. The Hutt does not negotiate with cantina owners. But they left that night without further confrontation, and you allowed yourself to believe that your refusal had been accepted, that Jabba would simply find another dancer, that powerful crime lords had more important concerns than one Twi'lek performer in a mid-level cantina. You were wrong. 2 nights later, your shift ended at the second hour past midnight, the twin moons of Tatooine hanging low in the sky as you walked the 10 blocks to the small apartment you shared with another dancer, a human woman named Sira. The streets were never truly safe at that hour, but you had walked this route hundreds of times, knew which alleys to avoid, which corners were watched by local gang sentries who maintained a rough peace in exchange for protection payments. You were 3 blocks from home, passing through a narrow alley between a droid repair shop and a moisture reclamation facility when the darkness ahead of you moved. A rough fabric bag, burlap that smelled of grain and spice, was yanked over your head from behind, cutting off your startled scream. Hands grabbed your arms, strong grips that lifted you off your feet, and you kicked and struggled but connected with nothing substantial. Something hard struck the side of your head through the bag, a blow that detonated stars behind your eyes and sent consciousness spiraling away into black nothing. You woke in darkness and motion, your head throbbing with nauseating pain, your hands bound behind your back with coarse rope that bit into your wrists. The bag had been removed, but you were enclosed in a metal cage barely large enough to crouch in, the bars cold against your skin, and through the cage you could see the interior of a land speeder racing across empty desert. The darkness outside, broken only by starlight and the vehicle's running lights. 3 other cages were secured in the cargo area, each containing a captive. Another Twi'lek woman, younger than you with green skin and terrified eyes. A human female who appeared to be unconscious, blood matting her blonde hair, and a Zeltron male whose natural empathic abilities would have been feeling everyone's terror, amplifying it, his pink face twisted in anguish. The journey lasted 3 hours by your internal estimate. The land speeder's repulsors whining as it crossed the Dune Sea, that vast expanse of desert where only the insane or desperate traveled, and where bodies could disappear beneath the sand within. Days scoured by wind and consumed by scavengers. When the vehicle finally slowed, you saw your destination rising from the sands like a monument to ancient power. Jabba's palace, built on the ruins of a Bomar monastery, its sandstone walls thick and windowless, its towers reaching toward the stars, its entrance a massive metal door decorated with the stylized image of a Hutt in bas relief. The land speeder descended into an underground hangar accessed through a concealed entrance in the desert floor, and you were dragged from your cage by Gamorrean guards whose pig-like faces showed no emotion beyond bored indifference. They herded you and the other captives through corridors carved from the living rock, lit by flickering torches that cast dancing shadows on walls covered in ancient murals depicting the monks' strange philosophy of disembodied enlightenment. The air was thick and hot, smelling of decay and exotic spices and something organic and foul that you could not identify. And from somewhere deeper in the complex, you heard music and laughter and screams. They threw you into a cell, a chamber 5 meters square with walls of dressed stone, furnished only with filthy straw scattered on the floor and a waste bucket in one corner. 10 other beings were already imprisoned there. Twi'lek females, human women, a green-skinned Mirialan, a Togruta with hollow eyes and broken Montrolls, all wearing the remnants of various clothing or nothing at all, their bodies displaying bruises and scars in various stages of healing. The door, solid Dura steel with a small viewport at eye level, slammed shut with a finality that made your chest constrict with panic. An older Twi'lek woman, her orange skin faded to pale coral, her leku scarred from old burns, crawled toward you through the straw. Her basic was accented but clear, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Welcome to hell, sister. I am Rena. How long have you been here?" "I just arrived. I was kidnapped from Mos Eisley 2 nights ago." Rena's laugh was bitter. 2 nights ago you were free. Now you are property. Jabba the Hutt owns you, and there are only 3 ways to leave this place. Serve until he tires of you and sells you to another master, die in the rancor pit, or escape into the Dune Sea where the Sarlacc or the desert will kill you more slowly. She gestured to the other prisoners. "We are his collection. Some have been here for weeks, others for years. Learn the rules quickly." Never refuse a direct command. Never show weakness in front of the other slaves because they will use it against you to gain favor. Never resist the guards or the torture will be creative and prolonged. Survive each day. That is all you can do. You spent that first night huddled in the straw, your body aching from the rough treatment, your mind racing with desperate plans for escape that all crumbled under examination. The walls were solid stone, 2 meters thick. The door was locked from the outside. No windows, no vents large enough for a being to crawl through. Guards patrolled the corridors beyond. Even if you somehow escaped the cell, you were deep inside a fortress in the middle of a desert, surrounded by Jabba's criminal empire that stretched across Tatooine and beyond. You were trapped as completely as if you had been encased in carbonite. Morning came without natural light. You knew it was morning only because guards arrived with food, throwing a single bucket of gray slop into the cell and watching with amusement as the prisoners fought over portions. You managed to secure a handful of the substance, which tasted like recycled protein paste mixed with sand, forcing it down because your body needed fuel even if your mind recoiled. An hour later, the door opened again and Gamorrean guards entered, pointing at you and 3 others. You, come. They marched you through the palace, and you glimpsed its full horror for the first time. Corridors lined with cages containing prisoners screaming for mercy or water or death. Torture chambers where beings hung from chains while interrogation. Droids worked on their flesh. Storerooms piled with contraband weapons and spice. A droid workshop where EV series units were dismembering captives for spare parts. And everywhere the smell of suffering and fear and the underlying musk of Hutt. Biology. The guards brought you to a large chamber that served as a preparation room, where a Twi'lek male servant with dead eyes directed you to wash in a basin of lukewarm water, scrubbing away the grime of the cell, and then presented you with your new uniform, a costume designed not for artistry, but for sexual objectification and humiliation. The outfit consisted of a metal bikini top, 2 small cups of hammered bronze connected by a thin chain, that barely covered your breasts and bit into your flesh with sharp edges, and a skirt of sheer red fabric that hung from a metal belt low on your hips, transparent enough to reveal everything it pretended to conceal. Leather sandals. Nothing else. Your own clothes were taken away, removed like the last vestiges of your former identity. When you tried to protest, to demand something more covering, the servant simply pointed to a mark on his own neck. A brand burned into the flesh, the stylized crest of Jabba the Hutt, and said, "Obey or join the ones who scream. Those are your options." The guards fitted each of you with a collar, a band of metal 2 centimeters wide that locked around your neck with a magnetic clasp, heavy enough to be a constant presence, tight enough to restrict deep breaths. From the collar extended a chain, 2 meters of thick links that ended in a larger ring. You were not told the purpose of the chain yet, but you would learn soon enough. They led you through more corridors, ascending now, climbing stairs carved from the sandstone, until you reached a pair of massive doors that opened onto the throne room of Jabba the Hutt. The chamber was vast, a cavern carved from living rock with a ceiling lost in shadows 4 stories above. The walls decorated with tapestries depicting scenes of Hutt dominance over lesser species. The air was thick with smoke from hookahs and braziers burning exotic incenses that made your head swim with mild intoxication. Music played constantly, a Max Rebo band with a blue ortolan on keyboards, a Yuzum singing in off-key wails, percussion that pounded like a headache. And everywhere you looked, beings, courtiers in elaborate robes, smugglers checking weapons, bounty hunters in armor, dancing girls in chains, protocol droids, torture droids, Gamorrean guards, humanoid servants, and creatures you could not identify. At the center of this chaos, elevated on a platform of stone 3 meters wide, rested Jabba Deseligic Ture himself. You had seen Hutts before. They were common enough on Tatooine, but never one so massive, so obscenely corpulent. He was 6 meters from tail to head, his body a mountain of green-brown flesh that glistened with oily sweat and the slime that Hutts secreted to keep their skin moist. His arms were thick as your torso, ending in stubby-fingered hands decorated with golden rings that strained against bloated digits. His head was enormous, with yellow eyes beneath heavy lids, a wide mouth filled with irregular teeth, and a long, muscular tongue that periodically emerged to lick his lips with disturbing wetness. He wore only a leather belt, from which hung various pouches, and a hookah pipe that fed stimulants directly into his system. The smell that emanated from him was overwhelming. A combination of unwashed flesh, digestive gases, rotting meat from his diet, and some musk that triggered primal revulsion in your hindbrain. Beside Jabba stood his majordomo, Bib Fortuna, a male Twi'lek who had clearly sold his soul, if he ever possessed one, for proximity to power. His skin was pale, almost white, his leku adorned with metal rings, his teeth filed to sharp points, and his eyes holding the empty cruelty of one who has become the instrument of oppression against his own people. Near Jabba's tail perched a small creature that looked like a diseased hybrid of monkey and goblin, its hairless skin mottled brown and gray, its mouth open in a constant cackling laugh that set your nerves on edge. You would learn this was Salacious Crumb, a Kowakian monkey lizard who served as Jabba's court jester, subsisting on a diet of parasites picked from the Hutt's flesh and whatever scraps of food or dignity he could scavenge from the suffering around him. The guards pushed you and the other new acquisitions forward, forcing you to kneel before the platform. Jabba's eyes, those terrible yellow orbs with vertical slits for pupils, fixed on each of you in turn, his gaze assessing, calculating value, determining use. When his eyes reached you, you felt physically violated by that stare, felt reduced to meat, to object, to a thing that existed solely for his amusement. He spoke, his voice a deep, rumbling bass, the words in Hutts that you did not understand. Bib Fortuna translated, his voice smooth and cultured and utterly without sympathy. The great Jabba welcomes you to his palace. You have been selected for the honor of serving in his presence as dancers and entertainers. You will perform when commanded. You will please when commanded. You will suffer when it amuses the great Jabba to watch you suffer. Those who serve well may be granted small privileges, better food, softer places to sleep, fewer beatings. Those who disappoint will be fed to the rancor or sent to the Sarlacc pit. Do you understand? You wanted to spit defiance, to scream that you were not property, that you had rights as a sentient being. But the words died in your throat as your eyes found the metal grating set into the floor 3 meters from Jabba's platform, and through that grating you glimpsed movement in the darkness below. Something massive shifting in the shadows, and a smell of predator musk and old blood rising from the depths. You nodded, along with the other captives, because what choice did you have? Good, Bib continued, gesturing to the band. Now dance. The music changed tempo, becoming faster, more insistent, and you rose on shaking legs and moved because your body knew how to dance, even when your mind was frozen with horror. You improvised movements from your performances at the Bright Sun, trying to maintain some shred of dignity, some reminder that you were an artist and not merely a slave. The other captives did the same, each displaying varying levels of skill. The young green-skinned Twi'lek had clearly trained as a dancer, her movements fluid and precise despite her terror. The human woman stumbled through clumsy steps, obviously not a performer. The Zeltron moved with the natural sensuality of his empathic species, but his face was blank with shock. Jabba watched with an expression that might have been pleasure, his tongue emerging to lick his lips, his thick fingers tapping the armrest of his platform in time to the music. When the song ended, he rumbled something in Huttis, and Bib nodded. The great Jabba is satisfied with most of you. But you, he pointed at the human woman who had danced poorly. You are clumsy and displeasing. Your value as a dancer is insufficient. Guards grabbed the woman before she could react, dragging her toward the metal grating. She began to scream, begging for mercy, for a second chance, But her pleas were answered only by the mechanical sound of the grating being raised on ancient hydraulics. The guards threw her through the opening, and her scream cut off abruptly as she fell 3 meters into the pit below. For a few seconds, there was silence, broken only by her whimpering prayers to gods that did not listen. Then a roar shook the chamber, so deep and powerful that you felt it vibrate in your chest, and the woman's prayers became shrieks of ultimate terror. The courtiers and guards rushed to the grating, peering down, and you could not stop yourself from looking as well, your eyes finding the scene below. The pit was circular, 6 meters across, the walls smooth stone impossible to climb. And in the pit was the rancor, a creature from nightmare, 5 meters tall and massing at least 1,000 kilograms, with gray-green skin thick as armor, arms ending in clawed hands, each the size of a human torso, and a head that was mostly mouth, filled with jagged teeth. The woman tried to run, but there was nowhere to go in the confined space. The rancor's hand shot out with surprising speed for something so massive, grabbing her around the waist, lifting her struggling body toward its mouth. What followed lasted less than 10 seconds but would burn itself into your memory forever, replaying in your nightmares for years to come. The rancor bit down, its jaws closing around the woman's upper body, and you heard the wet crunch of breaking bones, saw blood spray in impossible quantities, heard the creature's satisfied grunt as it chewed and swallowed. The woman's legs kicked frantically for a moment, still attached to her pelvis in the rancor's grip, and then went still as shock and blood loss accomplished what the teeth had not. The rancor finished its meal, dropping the remnants, chunks of flesh and torn clothing onto the pit floor, and looked up through the grating with small, intelligent eyes that seemed to be waiting for more. Jabba laughed, his massive body shaking with mirth, and Salacious Crumb shrieked his cackling laugh. And most of the courtiers joined in because that was expected, and you stood frozen in horror, understanding that you had just witnessed your future, if you failed to satisfy the monster who owned you. The grating lowered back into place, sealing the rancor in its lair, and guards brought forward a worker, a Bomar monk in a spider-legged apparatus, his brain visible in a nutrient jar atop the droid body, to hose the blood off the metal. Bib Fortuna gestured, and a scarred Quarren stepped forward carrying equipment. Metal collars, identical to the ones you already wore, but with chains attached to a central ring. He approached you first, unfastening your existing chain and replacing it with one that connected to the central ring, and then did the same for the 2 other surviving new dancers. When he finished, he lifted the central ring and attached it to a mount point on Jabba's platform, right beside where the Hutt rested his tail. The chain from the ring to your collar was 3 meters long, enough to allow you to move around the platform, to dance, to serve, but not enough to reach the floor level, not enough to escape. You were literally tethered to Jabba the Hutt, a living decoration, a pet that existed for his amusement. You will remain within reach at all times, Bib explained. You will dance when music plays. You will bring food and drink when the great Jabba desires. You will massage his mighty body when commanded. You will not speak unless given permission. You will not eat unless given scraps. You will sleep on the platform when the great Jabba rests. Any attempt to remove the collar will trigger an explosive charge sufficient to separate your head from your body. Welcome to your new life. That first day stretched into an eternity of hours. You stood on the platform, your neck aching from the weight of the collar, your feet burning from standing on stone, while Jabba conducted his business. Smugglers came to report on shipments of spice and weapons. Bounty hunters delivered captives. A Rhodian who had stolen from Jabba's operations brought in frozen carbonite and then thawed for interrogation and execution. A human woman accused of being an Imperial spy who Jabba questioned through bibs, translation before ordering her sold to slavers heading for the spice mines of Kessel. You watched beings plead for their lives, watched Jabba pronounce judgment with casual cruelty, watched bodies dragged away. When Jabba wanted food, servants brought platters of live creatures. Gorgs, fat amphibians that squeaked as Jabba grabbed them and popped them whole into his mouth, swallowing them alive, their struggles visible as bulges traveling down his throat. Rotting meat that stank of decay, which he chewed with evident pleasure. Exotic fruits from a dozen worlds. And always the hookah, the pipe delivering stimulants and intoxicants that kept him in a permanent state of altered consciousness that made his mood unpredictable and his commands arbitrary. He called you to him with a gesture, his thick finger beckoning, and you approached as close as the chain would allow. Massage, Bib translated, and you understood you were expected to touch that revolting flesh. You forced your hands to comply, pressing your palms against Jabba's back, feeling the slime coat your skin, feeling the massive muscles beneath the fat, kneading the tissue as he rumbled with satisfaction. The smell was overpowering at this distance, making you breathe through your mouth, making you fight your gag reflex. His skin was hot, warmer than human body temperature, and you could feel his pulse through the flesh, a slow, steady throb that reminded you this was a living being, a creature that had wants and pleasures and the power to satisfy them at the expense of anyone weaker. After an hour of massage, he dismissed you with a wave, and you retreated to the edge of your chain's length, trying to find a position where you could sit on the platform without being stepped on by the constant traffic of courtiers and servants. A green-skinned Twi'lek woman who you had not noticed before, she had been sleeping in the shadows near Jabba's tail, crawled toward you, her movements careful, her eyes warning you to silence. She was perhaps 25 years old, beautiful in the way that had likely contributed to her enslavement. But her beauty was marred by bruises on her arms and shoulders, burns on her leku that could only have come from torture implements, and an expression of such profound brokenness that you knew she had long ago abandoned hope. "I am Ula," she whispered when she was close enough that her words would not carry. "How long since you were taken?" "1 day. Last night." Ula's eyes showed pity. "Then this is your first day. It gets worse." Jabba's mood cycle. Sometimes he is content to watch dances and conduct business. Sometimes he is bored and seeks entertainment through pain. When he is bored, people die. Always be alert to his mood. Never refuse a command, no matter how degrading. Never resist when he pulls your chain. She touched her own collar, identical to yours. I resisted once, in the beginning. He pulled me against his body, pressed me into his flesh, held me there until I could not breathe, until I thought I would suffocate in his slime. Then he released me and laughed as I vomited. That was the lesson. He can kill you any time he wishes, in any way he wishes, and your suffering is his entertainment. The music changed, becoming faster, and Ula rose smoothly to her feet, her body moving into dance without conscious thought, a response trained through months of conditioning. You joined her, following her lead, learning the expectations. Dance was not art here. It was performance measured by Jabba's reactions, by the pleased rumbles or bored grunts, by the presence or absence of commands to the guards that meant someone would die. You danced for 2 hours without break, your legs cramping, your breath coming in gasps, sweat running down your body in rivulets that soaked the already minimal costume. When the music finally stopped, Jabba was asleep, his massive body rising and falling with snoring breaths that rattled the platform. The courtiers dispersed to other parts of the palace. The music band took a break, and the throne room emptied to perhaps 20 beings. Guards, a few sleeping slaves, protocol droids standing inactive in corners. Bib Fortuna approached the chain dancers with a tray, carrying 5 small portions of food, actual food, not the slop from the cells, and cups of water. "Eat," he commanded. "You performed adequately. This is your reward." The food was simple fare, bread and cheese and fruit, but after a day of nothing it tasted like the finest meal you had ever consumed. You ate slowly, savoring each bite, knowing it might be your only meal until you earned another through successful performance. The water was warm and slightly alkaline, but you drained the cup, your body desperate for hydration after hours of dancing. Ula ate mechanically, without pleasure, her movements those of someone fueling a body that no longer felt like her own. Night came, indicated only by the dimming of the torches and glow panels, to a level that allowed sleep without complete darkness. Jabba preferred to be able to see his possessions even while he rested. You were given no blanket, no pillow, just a space on the stone platform where you could curl up on your side. The chain from your collar to Jabba's mounting ring stretched to its full length. The stone was cold despite the ambient heat of the chamber, and hard, and you could not find a comfortable position. Around you, other chained dancers found their own spaces, creating a circle of enslaved beings radiating out from their master like the petals of some obscene flower. You did not sleep that first night, not truly. You drifted in and out of consciousness, jerking awake at every sound, the clank of guard armor as patrols passed, the distant screams from the torture chambers, Jabba's snores, the skittering of the palace's vermin. Your mind raced with impossible escape plans and memories of freedom and fears of the rancor's jaws. By the time the torches brightened to full illumination, signaling morning, you felt more exhausted than when you had lain down, your body aching from the hard stone and your spirit already beginning to crack under the weight of captivity. The days that followed blurred into a nightmare routine. Wake when Jabba woke, usually after only 4 or 5 hours of rest. Stand in attendance as he ate his breakfast of live creatures and rotting delicacies. Dance when music played, which was frequently. Jabba enjoyed music and kept his band performing for hours at a time. Serve food and drink to Jabba and his guests. Massage that revolting flesh when commanded. Stand for hours, waiting for the next command, your feet developing blisters and then calluses, your legs trembling with fatigue. Eat once per day if you performed well, or not at all if Jabba was displeased. Sleep on stone for too few hours before the cycle began again. You learned the palace's rhythms and horrors. Learned that the B'omar monks, whose monastery this once was, still lived here in their bizarre symbiosis with Jabba, their disembodied brains carried in spider-droid bodies, continuing their meditations on enlightenment while surrounded by the crime, Lord's depravity. Learned that the cells beneath the throne room held dozens of prisoners at any given time, beings awaiting judgment, slaves being broken to obedience, captives held for ransom. Learned that the rancor's name was Patiza, that it was kept by a handler named Malakili, who loved the creature despite its monstrous nature, and that it was fed at least once per week with victims selected from the prisoner population or from slaves who had displeased Jabba. You witnessed executions that became entertainment. A smuggler who had failed to deliver a spice shipment was brought before Jabba, and the Hutt listened to his excuses. Pirate raid, shipment lost, promises to repay, with an expression of boredom. When the smuggler finished his pleading, Jabba simply gestured to the grating. The man realized what was about to happen and tried to run, but Gamorrean guards caught him easily, dragged him kicking and screaming to the pit, and threw him to Patissa. The courtiers gathered to watch, placing bets on how long he would survive, cheering when the rancor grabbed him and bit down. You turned away, but could not escape the sounds, the screams, and the crunching, and the satisfied grunts of the beast, and afterwards Jabba rumbled with laughter and called for more music and dancing to celebrate. Another time, a Rhodian thief who had stolen credits from one of Jabba's operations was tortured publicly as a warning. They suspended him from chains in the center of the throne room, stripped him naked, and brought in an interrogation droid. One of the black spheres bristling with needles and electrodes and chemical injectors. The droid worked on him methodically, extracting screams that grew weaker as hours passed, until finally the Rhodian's body hung limp and silent in the chains. They left the corpse there for 2 days until it began to smell of decay, before finally cutting it down and disposing of it. You saw slaves die from beatings, from disease, from despair. A human girl, no more than 17, who had been captured with a group of refugees fleeing Imperial persecution, refused to stop crying despite repeated warnings. Jabba, annoyed by the sound, ordered Gamorrean guards to beat her until she was silent. They complied with enthusiastic brutality, their fists and axe handles breaking bones and rupturing organs, and she died on the throne room floor while Jabba watched and ate his breakfast. Her body was dragged to the waste disposal and dumped like garbage. The psychological torture was as constant as the physical danger. Jabba enjoyed humiliation, enjoyed reducing sentient beings to objects. He would pull your chain, drawing you close, press your face into his body until you could not breathe, laughing as you struggled for air. He would deliberately spill food and command you to lick it from his skin, from the floor. He would grab you with his massive hands, squeeze hard enough to bruise, run his tongue across your face in a grotesque parody of affection that made your skin crawl with revulsion. And always the chain, the constant physical reminder that you were tethered, that you could move only within a 3-meter radius, that escape was impossible. Ula tried to warn you, tried to teach you survival, but you could see she was already broken. She had been one of Jabba's dancers for 8 months, captured from a pleasure yacht where she had been performing for wealthy patrons. In that time, she had witnessed hundreds of deaths, had been beaten and burned and violated in every way short of actual rape. Hutts had no sexual interest in humanoids, but plenty of interest in domination and degradation. She moved through each day like a droid executing programming. Her spirit long since fled to some internal place where Jabba could not reach. She told you stories in whispered conversations during the rare quiet moments, of dancers who had tried to escape and been caught and fed to the Sarlacc, a creature in the dune sea that digested its prey over 1,000 years, of slaves who had tried to poison Jabba and failed because Hutts were resistant to most toxins, of a conspiracy to kill Jabba that had been discovered by Bib Fortuna, resulting in the execution of 17 beings who were tortured to death over 3 days while the court watched. "There is no escape," Ula whispered one night as you lay on the stone platform, both unable to sleep. "There is only survival until we can survive no more, and then there is the rancor or the Sarlacc or a blaster bolt to the head. Those are our futures, Nima. Death is the only freedom we will ever know again." You wanted to resist that hopelessness, wanted to believe that rescue would come or opportunity would present itself, but as weeks became months, you felt your own spirit beginning to fracture. The constant stress, the poor food, the lack of sleep, the endless cycle of performance and degradation, it wore you down like water wearing stone, eroding your identity until you began to forget who you had been before the collar. You stopped thinking about your family on Ryloth, stopped remembering your apartment in Mos Eisley, stopped imagining futures that included freedom. Your world contracted to the 3-meter radius of your chain, to the immediate concerns of avoiding Jabba's displeasure and earning enough food to survive another day. 4 months after your capture, a new slave arrived and you realized how far you had fallen. She was a Twi'lek like you and Ula, young and terrified, and when she was chained to Jabba's platform and commanded to dance, you watched with the same detached interest as the rest of the court, evaluating her performance, calculating her chances of survival. And when she stumbled and fell and Jabba rumbled with displeasure, you felt nothing as guards dragged her to the rancor pit, felt only a vague relief that it was not you. The screams as Patissa killed her barely registered in your consciousness. You had become what the palace demanded, a thing without empathy, a slave who accepted horror as normal, a broken being who served her master without resistance because resistance led only to death, and death was merely delayed through obedience. Then came the day that would change everything, though you did not know it at the time. It began like any other. Jabba holding court, conducting criminal business, being entertained by his dancers and musicians. Late in the afternoon, Bib Fortuna announced an arrival, a bounty hunter named Bush, claiming to have captured the Wookiee Chewbacca, wanted by the Empire and therefore valuable. The bounty hunter entered wearing full armor, helmet, chest plate, weapons belts, the voice modulator making speech sound mechanical and gender neutral. Chewbacca was in binders, roaring threats in Shiri-Wook, his massive furred body emanating defiance. Jabba was pleased with the catch, but haggled over price in typical Hutt fashion, refusing Bosher's initial demand. The bounty hunter responded by producing a thermal detonator, thumbing it active, threatening to blow the entire throne room unless paid appropriately. The court froze in shock. No one threatened Jabba in his own palace, but Jabba laughed, delighted by the audacity, and agreed to an increased payment. Boushh was shown to quarters, and Chewbacca was imprisoned in the cells below, and the court resumed its normal activities. But that night, long after Jabba had fallen into drugged sleep and most of the courtiers had dispersed, you heard movement near the carbonite slabs mounted on the throne room walls. Trophies of Jabba's victories, frozen captives displayed as decoration. One slab held Han Solo, the smuggler who had dumped a spice shipment years ago and had recently been captured by Boba Fett on Cloud City. You watched from your position on the platform, pretending to sleep as a figure in silhouette approached Solo's slab, operated the controls, and began the thawing process. The figure was Boushh, but as the bounty hunter removed the helmet, you saw the truth. This was a woman, human, with brown hair tied back and eyes that burned with determination and fear in equal measure. She worked quickly, and Solo emerged from the carbonite blind and disoriented, asking, "Where am I?" in a voice hoarse from hibernation. "Someone who loves you," the woman replied, and then they were kissing, and you understood this was a rescue attempt, and hope bloomed in your chest for the first time in months, because if someone could infiltrate Jabba's palace to save a frozen smuggler, perhaps rescue was possible after all. But the hope died as quickly as it had sparked. Lights blazed to full intensity, revealing Jabba wide awake on his platform, surrounded by guards who had been waiting in concealment. Salacious Crumb shrieked his mocking laughter. Bib Fortuna smiled with his filed teeth. It had been a trap, or at minimum Jabba had anticipated this possibility and prepared for it. Guards seized Solo and the woman, and Jabba rumbled commands in Huttese. Bib translated. "The great Jabba has been expecting you, Princess Leia Organa of Alderaan." Or what was Alderaan before the Empire demonstrated the price of rebellion. "You will make an excellent addition to his collection." They stripped away her armor, revealing beneath it a camouflaged outfit that they also removed, replacing it with slave costume identical to yours. The metal bikini, the sheer skirt, the collar, and chain. Within minutes, Princess Leia, a leader of the Rebel Alliance, a diplomat, a woman who had stood before the Imperial Senate and challenged Grand Moff Tarkin himself, was chained to Jabba's platform beside you, reduced to the same status, rendered as powerless as any other slave. But unlike you, unlike Ula, unlike every other broken being in this place, Leia's eyes did not show defeat. They showed rage, calculation, defiance that had not been beaten out of her. When Jabba pulled her chain, forcing her to recline beside him while his hand settled possessively on her body, she did not struggle. Her training or instinct told her that struggle would accomplish nothing, but neither did she submit internally. You could see it in the set of her jaw, the tension in her muscles, the way her eyes tracked every guard and weapon and potential opportunity. She spoke to you later, during a rare moment when Jabba was engaged in negotiations with a Duro trader and not paying attention to his slaves. "How long have you been here?" Her voice was quiet, controlled. 4 months, you whispered back. "Since before Alderaan." Leia's face hardened at the mention of her destroyed homeworld. "Jabba will pay for his crimes. They all will. The Empire, its allies, every being who profits from suffering." "There's no escape," you heard yourself say, Ula's words emerging from your mouth. "We survive until we can't, and then we die." "No." Leia's eyes fixed on yours with an intensity that felt like physical force. "We survive until we find our opportunity, and then we take it, no matter the cost. Watch for your chance. When it comes, be ready." The next day brought more disaster disguised as hope. A young human in black robes entered the throne room with the confidence of a Jedi Knight, introducing himself as Luke Skywalker, demanding an audience with Jabba. He attempted to use mind tricks, the famous Jedi power that could bend weak wills, but Hutts were immune, and Jabba laughed at the attempt. Luke warned that Jabba should release his prisoners or face consequences, and Jabba responded by opening the grating and dropping Luke into the rancor pit. Every slave and prisoner watched through the grating, expecting to witness another death, but Luke fought back. When the rancor grabbed for him, he wedged a bone in its mouth, and when that proved insufficient, he used a fallen gate release mechanism, bringing tons of durasteel crashing down on the creature's skull. The rancor died with a final roar that shook the palace, and from somewhere below, you heard Malakili's anguished screaming. He had loved that monster, cared for it, and now it was dead. Jabba's rage was immediate and towering. No one killed his possessions and lived. He ordered Luke, Han Solo, and Chewbacca taken into the desert and fed to the Sarlacc at the Great Pit of Carkoon, and because executions were entertainment, he commanded that the entire court would accompany him on his sail barge to witness the deaths. All slaves were to attend as well, to serve food and drink while their master watched beings die slowly. They loaded you and the other chained dancers onto the sail barge, a massive repulsor lift vessel decorated with luxurious furnishings and outfitted with weapons. The journey across the Dune Sea took 2 hours, the barge floating above the sands, flanked by skiffs carrying guards and the condemned. You stood on the upper deck, chained still to your mounting point, the hot wind of the desert whipping across your exposed skin, and you looked out at the vast emptiness and wondered if you would die here today, if Jabba's barge would somehow be destroyed in whatever the rebels had planned, if the explosion would be quick enough that you would not suffer. At the pit of Carkoon, you saw the Sarlacc for the first time, a massive creature partially buried in the sand, its mouth a beaked cavity 10 meters across surrounded by tentacles leading down into a gullet of nightmare. Jabba explained through Bib's translation that the Sarlacc would digest its prey over 1,000 years, that victims remained alive and conscious for most of that time, trapped in acid that slowly dissolved them while keeping them alive through some biochemical process. It was a death so horrible that your mind recoiled from fully comprehending it. They positioned the prisoners on a skiff above the pit, and Luke made his final appeal for Jabba to release them. Jabba responded by ordering the execution to proceed, and then chaos erupted. Luke caught a lightsaber thrown from the barge, the weapon of Jedi Knights, a blade of pure energy, and attacked the guards on the skiff. Han Solo, blinded by his carbonite hibernation, fought with improvised tactics. Chewbacca broke free of his bonds. On the barge, guards rushed to respond, and in the confusion, Leia moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. She was chained to Jabba, as you all were, the 3-meter length preventing her from reaching safety, but she did not try to escape. Instead, she moved closer, climbing onto the platform behind the hut, and with movements you barely saw, she unwound her chain from her neck and wrapped it around Jabba's. He reacted immediately, his hands grabbing for the chain, trying to pull it away, but Leia braced her feet against his body and pulled with all her strength, leaning back, using her weight and leverage, strangling the massive crime lord. It should not have been possible. Jabba outweighed her by hundreds of kilograms, had vastly greater strength, but she had surprise and determination and the mechanical advantage of the chain wrapped 3 times around his thick neck. Jabba thrashed, his tail whipping back and forth, his arms flailing, his body convulsing as he fought for air that could not reach his lungs. Bib Fortuna and other courtiers tried to intervene, but guards had engaged Luke and were too distracted. Salacious Crumb abandoned his perch and fled, his survival instinct overriding his parasitic attachment. You watched, frozen, as Leia's face contorted with effort, her arms shaking, her teeth bared in a rictus of exertion and rage, pulling the chain tighter, ignoring Jabba's desperate attempts to dislodge her. His yellow eyes began to bulge, his struggles becoming more frantic and then weaker, his massive body shuddering. And then, after what felt like an eternity but was perhaps 90 seconds, Jabba the Hutt went still, his hands dropping to his sides, his tongue lolling from his mouth, his yellow eyes fixed and staring at nothing. The crime lord who had terrorized Tatooine for decades, who had owned hundreds of beings like property, who had fed countless victims to his monsters, was dead, strangled by a woman 1/10 his mass who refused to accept slavery as her fate. Leia released the chain and jumped down from the platform, moving quickly to R2-D2, the astromech droid that had been serving drinks, which extended a small cutting torch. She used it to burn through the chain attached to her collar, freeing herself from Jabba's corpse, and then turned to you and the other chained slaves. "Get down. The barge is going to explode." The battle outside had turned decisively against Jabba's forces. Through the viewports, you could see Luke deflecting blaster bolts with his lightsaber, guards falling from the skiffs into the Sarlacc's waiting mouth, explosions erupting as someone, Lando Calrissian, you would later learn, disguised as a guard, sabotaged key systems. Leia grabbed a blaster rifle from a fallen guard and fired at the controls for the main deck, triggering secondary explosions. She shouted to anyone listening, "Abandon ship! Jump to the skiffs!" You wanted to follow, wanted to flee, but your chain was still secured to the mounting point on Jabba's platform, and without a cutting tool, you could not free yourself. Panic seized you as smoke began filling the barge's interior, as fire spread from console to console, as other beings, guards and slaves and courtiers, rushed for the exits. Ula was beside you, pulling frantically at her own chain, her green face twisted with terror. 3 other chained dancers were similarly trapped, screaming for help that no one seemed willing to provide. Then Leia was there, the astromech droid rolling behind her, its cutting torch extended. She worked quickly, burning through each chain at the mounting point, freeing you and Ula and the others. "Move, now. The reactor is going critical." She pushed you toward the exit, toward the open air and the skiffs floating nearby, and you ran without thinking, your bare feet pounding across the deck, your lungs burning from smoke inhalation. The distance to the nearest skiff was 3 meters, a jump across open air above the desert sand 30 meters below, and you did not allow yourself to think about the impossibility. You simply jumped, your body flying through the space, your hands catching the skiff's railing. Hauling yourself over, Ula jumped after you, landing hard but safe. The other freed dancers followed, one barely making the distance, her fingers scrabbling for purchase before Chewbacca's massive paw grabbed her arm and pulled her aboard. Behind you, Jabba's sail barge erupted in a massive fireball as its reactor finally breached, the explosion so bright you had to shield your eyes. The shockwave so powerful, it rocked the skiff and sent pieces of burning debris raining down onto the desert. The barge, that floating palace of the horrors, disintegrated in seconds, consuming everything and everyone still aboard. Bib Fortuna, Salacious Crumb, dozens of guards and courtiers and slaves who had not escaped in time. Jabba's body was incinerated, reduced to atoms, his criminal empire's headquarters destroyed. The skiff carrying you and the freed slaves, piloted by someone you did not recognize, accelerated away from the pit of Carcoon, joining 2 other skiffs that carried Luke, Leia, Han, Chewbacca, and Lando. The journey back across the Dune Sea was a blur. You sat on the deck, your arms wrapped around your knees, your body shaking with shock and adrenaline, unable to process that you were free, that Jabba was dead, that the nightmare had ended. They brought you to Mos Eisley, landing the skiffs in a repair yard owned by rebel sympathizers. There were perhaps 15 freed slaves in total, those who had escaped the barge before it exploded, plus the rebel strike team. Medical droids attended to injuries, burns from the explosions, blaster wounds, dehydration, malnutrition. Someone gave you water and you drank an entire canteen, your body desperate for hydration after months of rationing. Someone else provided you with actual clothing, a simple tunic and pants, and you put them on gratefully, covering the slave costume you had worn for 4 months, though you could not remove the metal collar, which would require specialized tools to safely detach without triggering its explosive charge. Princess Leia found you in the chaos of the repair yard, sitting on a crate, still shaking. She looked different now, had changed from her slave costume into combat fatigues, her hair pulled back, a blaster on her hip, but her eyes held the same intensity they had shown in captivity. She sat beside you, not touching, giving you space. "What's your name?" "Nima Val." Your voice sounded strange, hoarse from smoke and screaming. "Nima Val, you're free now. Jabba is dead. His organization will fracture. His lieutenants will fight over his territory, and in that chaos, the slaves he held across Tatooine will have opportunities to escape. We're coordinating with local resistance cells to extract as many as possible." Leia paused, studying your face. "Where do you want to go? Do you have family? A home?" I had an apartment in Mos Eisley. Before. I don't know if..." You could not finish the sentence, could not articulate the fear that 4 months might as well be 4 years, that your old life was gone, that you could not simply return to who you had been. "We have contacts who can help with housing, with work. The rebellion has a network for refugees and freed slaves. You don't have to face this alone." Leia placed something in your hand, a data chip. "This has contact information. When you're ready, reach out. We'll help however we can." Then she was gone, pulled away by urgent rebel business, and you were left holding the chip and staring at the twin suns of Tatooine sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded you of blood and fire. The freed slaves around you were beginning to disperse. Some had families they wanted to reach. Others were accepting rides to different settlements. A few were simply walking away into the desert as if movement itself was enough to prove they were no longer chained. You returned to your apartment in Mos Eisley 2 days later, after having the collar removed by a technician who specialized in such devices. He had freed a dozen slaves from Jabba's organization in the past week alone, each collar requiring careful deactivation to prevent the explosive charge from detonating. The collar came off, and you felt the absence immediately, the lightness of your neck strange and disorienting after months of constant weight. You kept touching your throat, expecting to feel metal, finding only your own skin. The apartment was exactly as you had left it. Kelvin, your former employer, had kept paying rent on it from the last paycheck you were owed, assuming you would eventually return or that your belongings should be preserved in case family came looking. Your clothes hung in the closet. Your few possessions, a hollow projector with images of your family, your dance costumes from before, a collection of music recordings, were undisturbed. It should have felt like coming home, but instead it felt like visiting a museum dedicated to someone who had died, a shrine to a Nima Val who no longer existed. You tried to return to your old life, attempted to reclaim normalcy through routine. You contacted Kelvin about returning to work at the Bright Sun Cantina, and he agreed immediately, sympathetic and horrified by what had happened. Your first night back on stage, you dressed in your dance costume, the artistic one you had worn before, colorful and covering, designed to enhance movement rather than to objectify. And you walked onto the stage, and the music began, and you froze. The lights, the watching faces, the attention of dozens of beings focused on your body. It was too similar to the throne room, to performing for Jabba and his court, and your chest constricted with panic. Your breath came in short gasps that could not fill your lungs. Your vision tunneled to a narrow point surrounded by darkness. Your hands shook so violently you could not control them. You fled the stage before the first verse of the song finished, pushing through the back door into the alley where you vomited and sobbed and could not stop shaking for half an hour. Kelvin found you there, eventually, and helped you back inside, and told you gently that perhaps you needed more time before returning to performance. You agreed because what else could you do? The thing you had been, the identity you had built as a dancer, had been corrupted by 4 months of slavery until you could not separate art from degradation, could not perform without triggering the trauma that lived in your body like a parasite in your nervous system. The nightmares were constant. Every time you closed your eyes, you were back in the throne room, Jabba's hand grabbing you, his tongue on your face, the weight of the chain around your neck. You heard the rancors roar, saw Ula falling into the pit, watched the human woman being chewed apart. You felt the panic of being trapped, tethered, unable to escape. You woke screaming 3 or 4 times each night, your sheets soaked with sweat, your heart racing, and you could not convince your body that you were safe, that Jabba was dead, that the chain was gone. You could not tolerate being touched. When Sarah, your former roommate, tried to hug you in greeting, you flinched violently away, your body reacting with fight or flight before your mind could recognize the gesture as friendly. Intimate contact was impossible. Your skin crawled at the thought of anyone's hands on you, anyone's breath near your face. You were profoundly, inescapably alone, isolated within the prison of your traumatized body, even though you were physically free. You developed hypervigilance, constantly scanning your surroundings for threats, unable to relax even in safe environments. Restaurants were impossible. Sitting with your back to a room triggered overwhelming anxiety. Crowds made you panic, all those bodies too close, blocking escape routes. You avoided the lower levels of the city where Gamorreans worked as enforcers for other crime bosses, because seeing their pig-like faces sent you spiraling into flashbacks so intense you lost touch with present reality. The physical damage was extensive as well. 4 months of malnutrition had left you underweight, your ribs visible through your skin, your muscles atrophied. Your feet were scarred from standing barefoot on rough stone for endless hours. Your neck bore permanent marks from the collar, discolored bands of skin where the metal had chafed and cut. Your leku, normally smooth and flexible, showed damage at the tips where guards had grabbed them to control you, nerve damage that would never fully heal, leaving patches of numbness and occasional shooting pains. You tried to drink away the memories, spending your dwindling credits on cheap alcohol in cantinas where no one knew your story, where you could sit in dark corners and disappear into intoxication that temporarily dulled the constant anxiety. But alcohol only delayed the nightmares, made them worse when they came, and you would wake in strange places with no memory of how you arrived there, your body punishing you for trying to escape what could not be escaped. Months passed in this gray existence. Not living, merely surviving, moving through days that held no meaning or pleasure or hope. You heard through the Holonet news that the Rebel Alliance had won a major victory at the Battle of Endor, destroying the second Death Star and killing the Emperor himself. The Galactic Empire was fragmenting, warlords and moffs fighting over the remnants. A new republic had been proclaimed. Princess Leia, now famous across the galaxy not just as a rebel leader, but as the Hutt Slayer who had killed Jabba, was helping to establish the new government. Other freed slaves began organizing, inspired by Leia's example, forming support networks and advocacy groups. You attended one meeting, sitting in a circle with a dozen other beings who had survived various slave organizations on Tatooine. And you listened to their stories, so similar to yours, variations on the same theme of capture and degradation and trauma, and you tried to participate, to share your experience. But the words would not come. Your throat closed, your breathing accelerated into hyperventilation, and you fled the meeting, unable to speak about what had been done to you. Ula found you 6 months after the escape. She tracked you down through the network of freed slaves, knocked on your apartment door one evening, and when you opened it, you barely recognized her. She had gained weight, her green skin had lost its pallor, and most significantly, her eyes held something that had been absent in Jabba's palace. A spark of anger, of purpose, of determination to transform suffering into action. "I'm leaving Tatooine," she told you over cups of caf in your small kitchen. "Going to Coruscant to work with a freed slave advocacy organization. We're documenting testimonies, pressuring the new republic to crack down on slavers, providing resources for survivors. I want you to come with me." You wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that you could be useful, that your experience could serve some purpose beyond simply destroying you. But you shook your head, unable to imagine leaving this apartment, this city, unable to face the larger galaxy. "I can't. I can't." Ula reached across the table and took your hand. You flinched but did not pull away. and her grip was warm and alive. Nima, we were both in that hell. We both survived. But surviving is not enough. We have to find a way to live, or what was the point? Jabba took 4 months from us, but if we let those 4 months define the rest of our lives, if we let the trauma control us forever, then he's still winning. He's still controlling us from beyond death. You understood the logic, even agreed with it intellectually, but knowing what you should do and being capable of doing it were vastly different things. I don't know how to live anymore. I only know how to survive, and barely that. Then learn. Ula's voice was gentle but firm. I had to learn. It's been 6 months and I still have nightmares every night. I still can't bear to be in enclosed spaces. I still see his face, hear his laugh. But I'm learning to carry it, to function despite it. You can too. But not here, not on this world where everything reminds you of what happened. Come with me. Start over somewhere new. You considered her offer for 3 days, weighing the terror of leaving against the unbearable stagnation of staying. Finally, driven less by hope than by the recognition that remaining in Mos Eisley was a slow death, you agreed. You packed your few belongings, said goodbye to Kelvin and Sarah, and bought passage with Ula on a transport to Coruscant. The core world was overwhelming in its scale and diversity. Trillions of beings living in a vertical city that covered an entire planet. The upper levels gleaming with wealth and power, while the lower levels descended into darkness and poverty. The advocacy organization provided you with housing in a mid-level district, a small apartment you shared with 2 other Twi'lek survivors, and offered you work if you wanted it. Administrative tasks, data entry, organizing supplies. Nothing public, nothing that required performance or testimony. Just quiet work that allowed you to contribute without triggering your worst symptoms. You fell into a new routine, one built around structure and support rather than survival. Therapy sessions twice a week with a counselor who specialized in trauma, talk therapy that slowly, painfully, helped you process what had happened, gave you tools for managing the panic attacks and nightmares. Support groups with other survivors, where you could share your experience with beings who understood, who did not judge, who carried their own scars. Medication that helped regulate the constant anxiety, that allowed you to sleep for more than 3 hours at a time. Progress was not linear. Some days were better, where you could leave your apartment and walk through the city and even appreciate moments of beauty. The sunset reflecting off the thousands of towers, the sound of alien music from a street performer, the taste of real food purchased from a vendor. Other days were worse, where you could not get out of bed, where the weight of depression pressed down on you until even breathing felt like too much effort, where you wanted nothing except for the memories to stop. 2 years after escaping Jabba's palace, you attempted to dance again. Not professionally, not for an audience, but alone in your apartment with music playing from your hollow projector. Your body remembered the movements, the graceful articulations that had once given you joy and pride and identity. You danced for 10 minutes before the memories intruded. Jabba's throne room, the smell of his flesh, the weight of the chain, and you had to stop. But 10 minutes was 10 minutes more than you had been capable of before. Small victories, incremental progress, the slow rebuilding of a life from fragments. You learned that healing from slavery was not about returning to who you were before. That person was gone, killed by trauma, irretrievable. Healing was about becoming someone new, someone who carried the scars but was not defined entirely by them, someone who could acknowledge the damage while still moving forward. You would never be whole in the way you had been before. Parts of you were permanently broken, and the cracks would always be visible if you looked closely enough. But you could be functional, could be useful, could find moments of peace and even rare instances of joy. Now, 3 years after the sail barge exploded over the Dune Sea, you sit in a counselor's office on Coruscant, participating in a recorded testimony project documenting the experiences of beings who survived Jabba's organization. The counselor, A Mikian woman with gentle eyes and head tendrils that shift colors with her emotions asks you to describe what it was like to be a slave in Jabba's palace. And you speak for 2 hours, your voice hoarse by the end, tears streaming down your face, but words finally flowing after years of being trapped in silence. When you finish, when the recording device is turned off and the session ends, you look out the window at the endless cityscape of Coruscant, billions of beings living their lives, each with their own stories of pain and survival and hope. And you think about the question that has haunted you since the day Leia killed Jabba. Was it worth it? Not the escape. That was obviously worth it. Survival is always worth it. But the survival after the escape, the years of struggling with trauma, the daily battle to function despite carrying the weight of those 4 months. You think about Ula, who transformed her suffering into advocacy, who speaks at New Republic hearings about the need for stronger anti-slavery enforcement. You think about Leia Organa, who strangled a crime lord with her own chains and became a symbol of resistance against oppression. You think about the thousands of other slaves across the galaxy who were freed when Jabba's organization collapsed, who escaped their own hells because one woman refused to accept captivity. And you think about yourself, about the Nimaval who exists now, damaged but alive, broken but healing, scarred but surviving. You work for an organization that helps other survivors, providing the support you wished you had received sooner. You contribute to a galaxy struggling to be better than its past, to build something more just from the ruins of empire and crime syndicates and systems built on exploitation. Your contribution is small, data entry and logistical support. But it matters because in the aggregate, millions of small contributions create change. You're 25 years old, though your body and mind carry the wear of someone decades older. Your leku still bear the scars from guards' rough handling. Your neck still shows the marks from the collar. Your sleep is still interrupted by nightmares 3 or 4 times per week. You still cannot tolerate crowds or enclosed spaces or the touch of strangers. You still see Jabba's face in moments of stress, still hear the rancor's roar, still feel the phantom weight of the chain. But you are alive. You are free. And on your best days, that is enough. The galaxy continues its cycles of oppression and liberation, of beings enslaved and beings freed, because the fundamental conditions that enable slavery, poverty, corruption, species prejudice, the concentration of power in the hands of those who lack empathy, these have not been eliminated by the Empire's fall or the New Republic's rise. On Tatooine, other crime lords have filled the vacuum left by Jabba's death, and new slaves are captured and sold every day. On Ryloth, Twi'leks are still targeted by slavers who see your species as exotic merchandise. Across 1,000 worlds, beings are trapped in systems of exploitation that reduce them to property, to objects, to things without rights or dignity. The fight continues, will always continue, because freedom is not a destination reached once and then secured forever. It is a constant struggle, a daily resistance against the forces that seek to profit from suffering. You are one small being in a galaxy of trillions, your impact limited, your scars permanent, your recovery ongoing and uncertain. But you survived Jabba's palace. You survived the chain in the throne room, in the constant threat of the rancor's jaws. You survived 4 months of systematic dehumanization designed to break your will and reduce you to a possession. And when freedom came, when Leia strangled that monster and the barge exploded and the nightmare ended, you survived that too. Survived the aftermath, the trauma, the slow, painful process of rebuilding something resembling a life from the ruins of who you used to be. That survival, that refusal to let 4 months of horror define every moment that follows, that determination to heal even when healing seems impossible, that is your act of resistance, your ongoing rebellion against everything Jabba represented. He wanted to own you completely, to reduce you to a thing that existed only for his amusement. But you are still here, still fighting, still growing, still becoming more than what he tried to make you. The scars will never fully fade. The memories will never completely release their grip. But you are more than your trauma, more than those 4 months, more than the slave who danced in chains on a crime lord's platform. You are Nimaval, a Twi'lek woman from Ryloth, a survivor of Jabba's palace, a being who carries unbearable weight and continues walking forward anyway because stopping means letting the monsters win, even from beyond death. And somewhere in the galaxy, another being is chained, another dancer performs under threat of death. Another slave survives each day by surrendering pieces of their soul. Your story is one of millions, your suffering neither unique nor final. The cycle will continue until the fundamental structures that enable it are dismantled, and that work, vast and overwhelming and generations in the making, has only just begun. But today, in this moment, you are alive and free, and that will have to be enough.